With you, I'm going to be down here on your level. There's two reasons for that. One, it's more comfortable to be here with you. And second, I can see the slides. So for this discussion, what we've been asked to do is talk about why teachers need to learn. And that's a pretty dense question to begin with. So I thought before we as a panel start to talk about the why and the how, let's delve into what has changed in education for children that makes us have to change as educators. But before I begin, let me also let you know, there were 70% of you who were educators in the room. We're going to be talking about the future, and we're going to be talking about the jobs, what the skills are that students need for the future. But teaching is future-proof. That means we're always going to need teachers. What we need teachers to teach is what is rapidly transforming, and why we are all, I think, here to try to figure out how. When we look at different governments and what they are saying about education, this is actually coming from, obviously, from the US. I'm sorry, I don't have a resource from here in India. But I've highlighted what they're finding in today's workforce. And that is that graduates come out with the technical knowledge that they need. What they may not have is the ability to be adaptable. They may not be able to really make decisions or to solve problems. And much of what the technical things in jobs today we do in 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have artificial intelligence. We're going to have other resources that will be doing that. And so what's left is what is highlighted up there. When we look at the World Economic Forum, they've just come out in 2018 with the skills that they say it's future work, but it's also future citizens, what they are going to need to be successful. And I'm going to come in here so that you can see it a little bit better. The first grouping is sort of the academic skills. It's what we have done well teaching in schools for the past 150 years. Some of the language may have changed. We see financial literacy there, but that goes into math and higher levels of math. Literacy is always going to be there, and obviously, if part of public education is helping to create citizens, then you want to have that civic education. The second grouping is really what we've been calling 21st century school skills in education, but we've been calling them that for about 35 years. So I think we need to move beyond them being 21st century skills, and these are just the skills that children and adults really need today to be successful. And these are the things that are absolutely in some classes. And there has never in history been a time when there were some students who got all of these. We all went to school with people who were incredible collaborators, who were able to communicate in ways that were beyond their years. What we're saying now is what we said about reading 100 years ago. These are essential skills. And as educators, it is our job to make sure that every child is able to think critically, that every child is creative, not just the ones that happen to have an environment that encourages that, or it's part of their natural dispositions. So for us in our school, we've been working on this now and embedding it in our curriculum for the past 10 years. This is across the world what schools have been trying to do. And then, because that's not enough for teachers to figure out how to do, we have added these skills. The good thing is our 4-year-olds all have curiosity. The bad thing is when you look at studies of schools and curiosity from the time a 4-year-old becomes an 18-year-old, that has rapidly diminished. And we're saying that this is an essential skill for students in the future. Adaptability. Our world is changing so rapidly that our children are going to have to know how to get a job, learn on the job, that job becomes obsolete, they move into a new job, a new career, a new profession, and it's going to happen multiple times during their life, so they need to be adaptable. And of course, the world has become so much, we say flatter, I would say more complex, because we are now interacting with more people from more different backgrounds than has ever happened before, and on a daily and a weekly basis. So for our kids, they may be able to stick something in their ear that will translate any other language. You cannot stick something in your ear to help you to understand the nuance of the words that are said. That's something that children have to learn, to pay attention to. I'm Irish and I'm American. My husband is always trying to figure this out. Which part of me is talking that comes from the Irish part of who I am, and which part of me is talking that's coming from the American part, and then how do I respond to that part of Fiona? That's complex, and that's just the two of us. We're talking about classrooms, we're talking about workplaces that are across the world at all times. So when we say, why do teachers need to learn? It's because what children need continues to change. And our jobs as educators is to figure out how do we help them to do that learning. So there are different education systems that have been working on this for a while. And I'm going to show you, according to Pearson, which is an international education really supplier, and they've ranked different school systems. I'm sure there are different lists than I'm about to show you, but I'm going to show you is the top 10 school systems, countries, and what I'm going to ask you to do is decide with a partner, which ones do you think are the top 5? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes right now to turn and talk to someone you're sitting with and decide which country do you think is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I put up my hand, I'm going to ask you to finish your sentence, not your paragraph. And I'd like you to give your attention back up here. Thank you for that. Okay, would anyone like to hazard a guess for which one is number 1? Yes. Finland. Finland. Singapore. Singapore. Lots of Singapore in the back. Okay. We have Finland, Singapore. Any other guesses? South Korea? Finland again. Okay, are you ready? What about Poland, right? Why is no one saying that? Irish. I did live in Poland, though, you're right. Oh. Now, I have good news for you. You are not being assessed on this. I know a lot of people said Finland. If you had looked at the 2017 rankings, Finland was number 1. So for 2018, there was a little bit of a shift, and I'd like to tell you that Ireland was number 11. But I decided to keep it to 10. And South Korea being number 1 is very interesting to me, and this is why. When I was doing my doctoral work, I was living in Brazil, and Brazil and South Korea had a sort of grown at the same time. They were coming out in the 1950s, they were sort of coming up as emerging economies. And so I did some study, comparative study of what happened in the education systems in both countries. And in South Korea, one of the things that they did was have a group of people above all of the cabinet level in the government, and they would come together and they would essentially look at the future, and they'd forecast in 30 years, what are the skills, what is the economy going to be like in the world? And then what do we need to do as a country in order to get our children and our society ready for those changes? And then they would go to each of the cabinets and say, okay, so in education, this is what we predict is going to happen. So what we're going to teach in school is this, and they'd work it down through the system. They would do the same with finance and on and on. And so South Korea has been a country that has forecast some of what we saw there in the World Economic Forum. And South Korea doesn't always have the best reputation for education. However, if you look at the happiness index, South Korea is actually way up at the top now as well. So they have a system to think through what do we want to do in education. And I would posit that Finland is the same, that they've really put a lot of thought at every level into what is it that we need to do in education and in society in general. So today we are going to be talking about teachers, and we're going to be talking about how teachers need to learn. But teachers are part of a system. Nothing is going to change just because of teachers. We are also a part of that system. And so I hope that when we leave today, as much as we're going to talk about teachers and teacher education, that we also recognize that we, as participants and parents in this system, have a place as well in helping to make this learning and training and change happen. So with that, I'm going to invite our panelists up here with me. Thanks. Shall we start with our first question as we're getting set there? So this first question I'm going to pose to Elizabeth first, and then Ramya and Aditya, once he's on, if you would like to also speak to it, please do. And the first question, Elizabeth, is what are the qualities that educators today need to support student success, both now and in the future?
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here. I think my answer to that, and going back to the major thing, I think we all need to learn. And we all need to learn continuously. It's not just teachers. And if I'm a little forthright, I think that we're all caught up in a system that fundamentally is not working. I'm not blaming anyone, but there's a big need for systemic change. And these qualities that I think teachers need are the very same ones that students need. And this is one of the major problems in teaching education, in education per se. My list is very much the same list that was up there. Collaboration, particularly. In the 21st century, we're all using the net. We're all using other people's ideas. Collaboration in the workplace, a knowledge explosion. And yet we still have an educational system that is competitive, getting the highest marks. Learning outcomes tend to be limited to literacy and numeracy, and we all talk about these skills. They need to be in teacher education. Look at the processes in teacher education. Are they collaborative? If you've been in a teacher education college recently, you may have 100 teachers sitting on benches, looking at a blackboard. Is that teaching the skills of collaboration? I have a lot of questions. I think passion is essential. Passion for children, being able to enter the child's world, listening to children. Our classrooms need to change. One-to-one interactions. Helping teachers build on what the students are saying rather than working to a syllabus, a tight syllabus. Children are creative. You mentioned decision-making. Children are naturally decision makers. They enter school. They're told who knows best? Teacher. Sit and listen. It's not going to work in the 21st century. That's my answer briefly.
Well, I appreciate that, and you hit on two big points. The idea that we have to model what we want for our children, and that is sort of a fundamental for both teacher education and for teachers in the classroom. Ramya.
Yeah, and if I just add to that, of course, this question of what are the qualities that define a good teacher is actually the heart of my day-to-day life. So this is the question that we are thinking about all the time. And as Elizabeth said, there is a set of things that we call professional competencies like collaboration, focus on holistic development of children, etc., which is you in your professional environment and how you operate as a teacher in your professional environment. There are also certain things that we call sort of core competencies intrinsic to an individual, like communication, logical thinking, and so on. But what I want to particularly add to what Elizabeth said is what we call the technical competencies of a teacher. And I somehow feel that in a lot of the discussions or work around teacher education, while on one side we want the teacher to know how to sort of operate, at the core of it, there are also certain technical things that the teacher as a professional needs to know and understand. So, for example, one of them is the subject itself. So, understanding of the subject. It's interesting that the survey in the US said that graduates are coming out with good technical prowess. Surveys in India don't say that. So you go to a master's in science college and students don't end up answering 8th standard science questions. So fundamental subject understanding to me is an important technical competency. Similarly, the fundamental aspects of pedagogical sequence, how content is to be delivered, what is the right method of conveying a particular piece of content, student assessment. So how do you understand what misconceptions your students have and what is the best way to remedy them? So a bunch of these technical competencies. And the reason I specifically also want to add this is that the specialness of a particular profession, and I don't know if specialness is a word, but the specialness of a particular profession comes from the technicalities associated with it. And if we ask why is teaching different from being a doctor or being a lawyer or being a chartered accountant, it comes from the technical competencies which are specific to being a teacher, which for example, I cannot have. I'm not a teacher. And I feel that I should know that I cannot have them. And I cannot claim to be a teacher without having those technical competencies. So that's what I would just add and totally agree with everything that Elizabeth said.
So you're bringing up that there is evidence-based practice for what works for teaching and for learning for any of us. And so teachers need to have that technical knowledge as well as the content and all of the other skills that we've talked about. That means that when we are here today and we are teachers, one of the things we know is that the people doing the talking are doing the thinking. So I'm going to invite you to turn again to somebody beside you and just have a 2-minute conversation about what did you just hear, what makes sense to you, and what do you have questions about what you heard. I'm going to invite you to have that conversation now. I'm happy to introduce you now to Aditya, who is joining us a little late but full of ideas. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
And Aditya, we just had a conversation about what the qualities are that educators need today. And now I would like if you could start us off talking about where in India do you see educators that have the technical knowledge, the pedagogical skills, and as well the disposition to be joyful learners along with their students in their classrooms?
I'd like to just start by apologizing I couldn't be there. I suddenly developed a medical condition and couldn't catch the flight today. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming from even through Skype.
Yes. So I think we find it in many small pockets in the private sector and within the government. We have over 12 million teachers in the country. And if we look for a country of that size, are these teacher development institutions littered all over the country? I definitely don't think so. If my daughter wants to study engineering, she knows which are the best institutions to go to. She knows the IIT, she knows the triple ITs, she knows the stack ranking of those institutions. If she wants to study to be a lawyer, she knows the National Law Schools are the place to go. But if she needed to really be a teacher, she has to scrape. I wonder how many people in the audience would know which are the top 5 institutions that they would want to send their own children to, which would be socially acceptable and actually train one's own children to be at the top of their profession, like a doctor or a lawyer or a chartered accountant. So these exist in extremely small pockets. Delhi University has an excellent program called the Bachelor's in Elementary Education, but it works for 200 students a year. Multiple non-profits run standing teacher development programs, but they're all talking about 100 or 200 teachers. And the number of teachers that we need to prepare is an order of magnitude larger, because we have a 12 million base. So I think we're struggling to find these outstanding institutions which build the technical competencies that Ramya spoke about and the predispositions that Liz spoke about.
Thank you.
But Liz runs one of those programs too.
Yes, we do.
Elizabeth, do you want to speak a little bit about your organization and the work that you do and how you see your pocket of excellence, perhaps in other organizations that you have worked with?
Well, Muktangan, we are training community members as teachers, and they are extremely committed. I think the difference is we integrate teacher education with schooling. So there's a lot of give and take. The faculty are common. We do a lot of internship. Faculty do the in-service training. And I think on it as a model, and we very much concentrate on the teachers and the trainees observing children, trying to assess their learning needs, looking on children as individuals. We're into a lot of outreach with state government and the municipality. We're doing a lot, but it is a problem. The teacher education system, I mean, our teachers are getting their certificates. We have teachers who've already done teacher training coming into our teacher training course. And in fact, the Secretary of Education, Maharashtra, was asking them, SCRT came and said, why are you doing this course when you've already done the government course? They said that course that we did to get our certificate didn't teach us really how to teach. And that's the problem. Getting a certificate, you have to do teacher education, but is it really qualifying you in the classroom? That's a big question. The quality of it.
So just having the degree is not going to get you what you need, and the hands-on work that's happening in your school and then in other schools because of that is helping. And I know for us, we work with a number of organizations that are doing the same, where they're providing teacher training, whether it's 321, I know Gaurav is here, or I'm a teacher that's taking mid-career professionals and retraining them as teachers. But it seems like it's more, it's either teachers who are continuing their education, or that they're not going to get a certificate or a government certificate, but they'll get a micro-credential. Yeah. You must be seeing some of the same with your Olympiad, those pockets and those teachers in different parts of the country.
Yeah, I think as Aditya said, there are pockets of excellence in various parts of our landscape, and interestingly, they are not restricted necessarily to the highest fee-paying schools or the private sector at large. So they come from everywhere. So we find outstanding teachers. So in our work, we end up surfacing star teachers from around the country. And interestingly, we find a teacher who might be working with hearing impaired children in Tura in Meghalaya who comes in our sort of nationally best teachers. We might find a teacher from a remote village in Tamil Nadu who comes among the sort of the nationally best teachers. And there'll be teachers from Mumbai, there'll be teachers from Delhi, there'll be teachers from private schools, from the government sector. Interestingly, a couple of them are sitting here, very, very glad to see them. So teachers get surfaced from all over, and there are these pockets of excellence. So I totally agree with Aditya, and probably later in the discussion I'll probably share some thoughts on why this might be happening. But I'll come back to that as you take the discussion forward.
Actually, I think that's where we need to go next. That we have these pockets of excellence. So what are the ways that we're going to be better able to leverage those pockets of excellence to provide more quality education to more students? And in India, we always talk about at scale. So I'll start with you, Ramya. What are some of your ideas for how that can happen based on your experience?
So when I think about this question, why do teachers need to learn? I think invariably we think about the question from the point of view of an outsider looking at the teacher and saying, why do you need to learn? And we say you need to learn because our children need to learn, and for teaching our children you need to learn, and you play the most important role in the system, etc. I want to flip this around and ask from the point of view of the teacher, why do I need to learn? And there's one part of that answer which says the same thing that the system is saying, I need to learn so that my students can learn. But there's also another part of it which I think we fundamentally miss, which is that I need to learn because it will make my own professional life and career better. And that answer is what, fortunately or unfortunately, and whether we like it or not, drives a lot of professionals across professions, that I need to be a better doctor or a better software engineer or a better lawyer, a better management consultant, whatever, because that's what will drive the growth of my career. That's what will help me become successful. That's what will make me famous, whatever else I want in the material world. And for teachers, we somehow don't accept that answer. And we say that the only reason you need to learn is because your students need to learn. And that's a good reason. But the other reason I also need to learn is so that I can also be successful and be recognized for that. And I think because we miss that piece, we are fundamentally missing the biggest driving force for teachers or any other professionals to learn, which is themselves. And if that alignment can be there, whereby learning my career can become better, my professional success can improve, then you don't need to tell me. I will learn myself. And I will figure out as an adult how to learn. And there are enough resources out there. Today, fundamentally, I don't do that because it doesn't lead to much for my professional growth. And if I can somehow create the conditions as a system where it can lead to professional growth for the individual, I personally feel we don't need to do much else. The individual will figure out how to learn. We don't go into a doctor's cabin and teach them how to conduct the surgery. We, as a market, we decide that this doctor is good and that doctor is not. Let's, go to this doctor. And that propels a larger group of people to improve their practice. And at least my personal hypothesis is that this condition we need to start creating in teaching as a profession. And to me, that's when we would be treating it as a real profession operating from within, as opposed to something that needs to be changed from the outside. And from the outside, what we would do is create the opportunities, figure out how we reward, recognize, drive career growth for our best teachers, and programs will automatically scale up. And people will be signing up for the best programs automatically because there is opportunity associated with that. So this is a hypothesis. But I'm not just stating the hypothesis, I'm trying to live it. And this is the core of our work as an organization. And it's a long journey. But we are trying to bring about this fundamental change where the system starts rewarding outstanding teachers in a better manner, which therefore means that teachers want to become that outstanding teacher who is getting rewarded. And of course, there will always be the outlier 1% or 5% who will say, I don't care for external reward, I'm just doing it for my own satisfaction and nothing else. But there is the average professional who is saying that the external reward matters, and I'm happy to improve myself, but please do recognize it. And that cycle is what we are trying to create with absolutely no judgment for wanting to get rewarded.
Well, it's interesting because I think you've just set up almost the two sides of a polarity. On the one hand, if I can paraphrase, I'm going to use Daniel Pink. He says that for anyone, what we need to be to feel fulfilled is that we have autonomy in what we do, we're able to develop mastery, and that we feel like we have a purpose. So for teachers, if they have some autonomy in their role, if they are able to get to mastery and then they have a purpose, then they're going to want, we all do. And then whatever the rewards are over here actually matter less. You see in HR studies all the time that people who feel satisfied over here, they care less about the outside rewards. But you want this more if you feel less autonomy, mastery, and purpose in your role. So you've brought together those sort of two sides of motivation for all people as well as absolutely for teachers.
Yeah, and there are stages that a system goes through. So there is a stage when this external reward plays a very important role. And I think our average system is still very much at that stage and might remain there for a while. And there will be a subset who keeps moving over to the other side, where they've reached a certain level of, reward and recognition, and they're saying, now all that doesn't matter. I'm just doing this for, my own purpose and autonomy and mastery. And we hope more and more of the subset will move there. But we cannot assume that till there is a basic sense of reward and recognition, which is creating that pipeline.
And I don't think conscious scaling up really works, because I think that's one of the problems in the system. Constantly trying to improve it by force from the outside. That doesn't work. We've been asked to do workshops on motivation for teachers because teachers aren't motivated. Do you think that will really work? It's the system that's not giving them the autonomy. And the system says, you can't give teachers autonomy because they won't perform. But I ask a question. It's a chicken and egg situation. If you don't give them autonomy, they will not perform. So it's a systemic issue, definitely. The teachers are being treated as subjects, not as professionals, as objects, not professionals. And they can do a lot. They care about kids, and we've found it in our work. Even the most demotivated people, given the freedom, start performing. So
it's those skills of curiosity and decision-making as well, right, that we saw earlier that we're talking about too. Aditya.
I've been waiting to come in on this one. I want to pick up on what Ramya said and Liz is sort of building on. Let's just go back to seeing what is the history of teacher development in this country. The entire administrative structure of government has been still is largely plus minus 20% from what it was pre-independence. And the pre-independence architecture was set up for law and order and tax collection. It was not set up for an empowering a population. So therefore, what were the words that are used in the administration? You use words like inspection, monitoring, suspension, transfer. These are the 4 tools that a leader within the current administrative system uses. So I come and inspect you as a teacher to see whether you're good enough. I monitor what you do. I transfer you if you've not done a good job. And I suspend you if you irritate me. Now, if we move from that to, that system, but then we want you as a teacher. I'm going to inspect, monitor, suspend, and transfer. But you need to enable, care, inspire children. And this is the inherent dichotomy. So unless we transform the way the leadership and the systems and the incentives work, teachers are not going to be treated well. And if they are not treated well, to expect them to treat children well is highly unlikely. So if we treat them as adults who are capable of learning, want to advance themselves, want to progress, then they will treat children like that. But unfortunately, when you're a teacher, the starting assumption inside government is that you must be lazy, you must be political, you must be corrupt, and you're generally good for nothing. And this is true for 10-15% of the people maybe, but it gets broad brushstroke applied to everyone. So unless we actually convert our government systems to have a much more positive culture, almost the way I sort of, just to create an extreme, I'd like to say from the pre-independence culture to almost a Google type culture, where teachers are dying to come in and work. Because professionals develop exactly like what Ramya said, when the incentives and the culture are built in a way in which I am encouraged to develop, not just in that one award that I get, but during the year. I know a teacher, poor lady, she organized, she was working in a minority community in a government school, and she found that girls were not attending enough. And so she organized a whole set of sports events, preschool, to get children involved. And the attendance shot up. But her inspector came in and said, sports is to be organized only in October. You've done it in July. So I'm putting a cross mark against you. So we change the way that leadership at the school level, cluster, block, and district level operate and respect teachers and help them develop the culture of professionalism. I don't think we're going to have a large-scale transformation in this.
Thank you. I think what everyone has said is have teachers be professionals and treat them like professionals, and then we will see that teacher learning happening. I think, time-wise, we have time for one more question before we open it up to our audience. And so I am going to end with this question. Based on your experience and understanding of the landscape here in India, what are the 3 leverage points that could bring change to teacher education? I say 3. If you only have 2, it's okay. Elizabeth, please do.
Okay, I think one thing is crucial. I did my teacher training, I don't like the word training, my teacher education in India after having taught, I don't know, for about 15, 18 years. But I found that the faculty in teacher education colleges often had not had much classroom experience themselves, and they didn't understand what happens in the classroom. And that's why I feel in Muktangan, our teacher educators are not just in the pre-service centre. They're doing in-service training, they're hearing from the teachers what works in the classroom, what doesn't. There needs to be greater integration between teacher and school education. That's one point. Shall I give 3 or we pass it round?
Go for it.
Next one is about the admission system into teacher education. How are the future teachers selected? At the moment, it's based on marks. Just because you've scored high in an exam, does it mean you're going to be a good teacher? And we've trained teachers who have only just passed the 10th standard exam. They've made fabulous teachers, and when they've got into the classroom, they said, we've got to get that certification, we've got to get our high degrees. They've got masters now, because they've enjoyed teaching. It's not marks. And the whole assessment process in teaching, we always told them initially, there's no exams. Big cheer. When do we assess you? All the time. And the whole process of assessing teachers in the training and giving feedback and helping them develop to the next level needs to change. I think those are the most important ones. And learning to observe children. In any teacher education course, you are told to observe classrooms and told how to observe the delivery of the curriculum, not how children learn. And that's what we do in Muktangan. They observe 2 children throughout their training. Have small tutorial groups, that's another thing, not 100 teachers listening to lectures. Bringing their non-judgmental observations of the children back to the tutorials, learning from the children, and creating a case study at the end. I think that entering into the child's world is essential.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the 3 that I would list, one, of course, very biased, teacher certification, and I decided to work on it because I think of it as a leverage point, so I can't avoid naming it in my list. So I do think it's a powerful leverage point to have and when I say certification, for me a certification is just a piece of paper if it doesn't connect you to opportunities. So something that says that these are the competencies you have and is sufficiently acknowledged by the market so that you get jobs, you get promotions, you get bonuses, you get recognition, whatever else you want with that piece of paper. So to me, that is a very important leverage point for our teacher education system. And it goes back to what we discussed earlier, which is teachers, therefore, themselves wanting to learn, wanting to acquire those competencies towards those opportunities. The second very important leverage point, as I see it, is what parents ask schools for. So ultimately, schools make rational economic decisions. So I don't think school owners are, in any way, we blame schools for lots of things, but I don't think they are in any way, doing something negative. They are simply responding to a market. And the rational economic decision they are making is that if my parents want the walls to be painted in bright colors, great. If my parents want good technology to be in the classroom, that's what I'm putting. If my parents want good teachers, then that's what I'll do. So the second big leverage point in the system is parents being able to ask for good teachers. And there again, there is a language needed for parents in terms of how do you ask, because if you say, do you have good teachers? Schools will say, yes, we have them. So there is a certain currency that parents need, whatever that currency is. So do you have teachers who hold a certain kind of competency? So, and how do I name that? So that to me is another powerful leverage point, which is how do you give parents that currency to ask for a certain kind of teacher in the school? The third, to me, is On the teacher development side, and this is more a policy lever, which is how do we free up the teacher development space to some extent where it is possible to run a teacher development institute that can be affiliated to whatever certification the market looks for. So not necessarily affiliated to a particular degree program, but whatever the market is asking for. And in pockets, it's already happening. But the bigger change here will come when policy changes around that. So those would be my top 3.
Thank you. So far, I think we have 5 very different ideas. And let's add Aditya in here as well.
So like Ramya said, mine is also biased by the work that I do. And I have my top 2. And those would be leadership and data. What do I mean by leadership? So if we take a typical district in the country, and there are 700 of these, there are about 20,000 teachers spread across 1,000 to 2,000 schools. Now, the type of leadership that will be required in a typical corporate organization to keep 20,000 people motivated, inspired, constantly trying to excel and improve themselves. We would invest a huge amount of money. We would select those leaders really carefully. We would select the school leaders carefully. We would select the cluster or the block level and the district level leaders very, very carefully. Unfortunately, in the current system in government, leadership is by seniority. That means the senior most physics teacher automatically becomes head of the school. The senior most. So one day I'm teaching physics, next day I'm head of the school. One day I'm teaching English, and next day I'm head of the school. If we ran our companies like this, I don't think our companies would work. Right? So how do we set process to select the most motivated, the most adept, capable people to become leaders of schools, clusters, blocks, and districts? And really, each district has about 150 key leaders who manage these 20,000 teachers. And so if you multiply that by 700 districts, it's really 100,000 leaders. 150 leaders per district into 700 districts. So this 100,000 is, I think, our leverage point. We don't need to change the country as a whole. All we need is to select the 0.1% of teachers who are the most motivated and most adept and put them into 100,000 roles and provide them the professional development, because they are the best teachers. Definitely out of your 12 million teachers, there are 100 who are outstanding.
Aditya, you're breaking up a little bit, so can I just clarify that we understood what it is that you're saying? You're saying we look at the best teachers that are out there,
Yes.
and we build and help them to grow into leadership. And this is the part I just want to clarify. And then they would become the school leaders, or they would become the learning leaders for the districts, the organizations, or you're thinking more about being principals, just to clarify?
Both.
Okay.
Right? The process of selecting school as well as district leaders are both deficient in the country. And so if these smartest teachers knew that when I worked well, I would become a school leader and then a block and a district leader, and I have a career path when I improve myself. And I have learning and development opportunities that are provided to me as I grow. I think that would be the biggest leverage point, because today teachers don't learn because they don't see how it helps them grow professionally. Their careers don't change. They continue to stay in the same roles, doing the same jobs.
And it sounds like similar to what Elizabeth said, it's that on-the-job training as well, where you see master teachers doing the work, and that's how you're going to learn to and grow. So we want to have to really transform teacher learning, we need teachers who are adept and are still embedded in the classroom to be able to provide that professional learning for teachers. We need to have people who are dedicated to children and able to see them as they are as human beings. And to really recognize the expertise that takes, we need to have accreditation, or we need to have certificates that will acknowledge and encourage that sort of teacher and that sort of learning into the future. And then we need to educate parents. We need to let parents know that this is what a good teacher does, and that's the kind of person that you want for your children. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the audience for some questions. We have a couple of people who have microphones, so if you have a question for the panel, they'll come and give you the microphone. Yes, thanks.
This is a question for everyone. Very good discussion. Value-based education is not in the syllabus. Education has just become a ticket to get a job. Mr. Natraj does something wonderful there. So then you don't create a good society, and we can see it around us. What are your comments or thoughts on that? Teachers are also constricted by the syllabus. So it's a double whammy then.
So how do we embed values education into the curriculum? Because you can't really teach over here, be a good person outside of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
I feel very strongly that values aren't taught. And I mean, I hate using jargon, but it's transacted throughout the curriculum. And if you've got reflective teachers who are constantly reflecting on these values, they get incorporated into the regular classroom transaction. I've seen too often, silence is golden on classroom walls. Cleanliness is next to godliness. That's not going to teach kids anything. You need to develop your curriculum where these values are integrated into the way you deliver it. Are we making children aware of diversity and the value of diversity in our social studies? Are we just teaching them to read maps? Are we getting them to see diversity is there in the world and it's a value? Just one example.
Aditya, would you like to respond?
Yes, I agree with Liz that it's not just about putting it up on the wall, it's about practicing it. And I want to bring back here the importance of what leadership does. If the leader of the school comes in on time, is empathetic, cares for children, the teachers then role model that, and children then role model empathy and respect. If you go to the traditional, my dad went to a private school, which was basically a Don Bosco, and the principle of the Don Bosco is created through a spiritual process. He's there for a sense of service. And when for a sense of service, he's there for a sense of values. Teachers start emulating that and children start emulating. So I think it's not just about curriculum, but it's about whether the adult system role models these values. And children catch that out very quickly when you don't.
Thank you. Over here, thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for a very informative discussion. I found it particularly interesting, the suggestions you had at the end. And a commonality amongst those was the need to affect policy or leadership right at the top. And I'm curious to what extent you've engaged in those type of efforts and the receptivity or reactions that you've had. Fiona just started the discussion by saying, the top education system is South Korea, and they have a group of people who get exposed to best practices and then try and influence other leaders. Now, is that something that's even relevant or feasible in our context? Or how is it that you think about the next set of steps to start engaging in some of the things you talked about? Is it about extending your organizations, or is it about doing something different? Or if you could just talk to that, please.
Aditya, you look like you were about to speak.
Yes. So I love that question. I think you're very right. There's a lot of policy change and practice change that's required in India. What I'd like to state as a starting assumption, most people believe that there is inadequate political will for this change. My experience is that the political will exists. We work in 14 different states with 7 different political parties. And across the board, the political will exists to try and solve this problem. Even the administrative will exists. The principal secretary wants to cause change. I think the problem is capability. It's an administrative capability. It is not in political will, not in administrative will, but it is in administrative capability. And the problem is that policies are typically set for what we need to achieve for children. We still don't have policy states what we need to do for creating a better culture for teachers to develop. We will talk directly about what needs to happen for values education. But that's not going to happen unless you put in place a whole set of policies in the middle, which is for how is leadership going to be developed, how are teachers going to be developed, what incentives are going to be set up. And I think that's where the private sector can get much more involved, because the private sector has experience in setting in place policies to make sure that their last mile work is effective and puts in place process, systems, incentives for them. So I don't think it's just policy as we normally talk about, which is, should it be English and Hindi, or should it be a dual language, single language? Because whenever you say the word policy, it gets restricted to things like that. But this, I think, is sort of the policies that are required for running the engine of administration.
Ramya, please.
So partly I agree with what Aditya is saying, but partly also a different take on this. While when we were asked to list 3 things each, I also added a policy lever, because when you're talking about education, it feels like, okay, at least one of the 3 things should be a policy. But frankly, me and my organization are not betting on policy change. We are betting on the market. And in a country like India, a lot has happened through the market. In education, we somehow tend to think that things need to happen through regulation, things need to happen through policy, through the government. But equally, in education, there is a big market of decision makers out there. There are parents, there are schools, there are teachers, and each of them is making decisions based on a set of rational criteria according to themselves. And the question is, how do we align those criteria in a manner that can drive quality improvement? So to your question, Anshul, on what do we see as the way forward for our own organizations, as CENTA, we are trying to make the CENTA certification more and more accepted by the market. That market being the employers, as in schools, publishers, content organizations, teacher training organizations, whatever employers. And if the employers value it enough, then I, as an individual teacher, would like to take this certification. In turn, I would like to build the competencies required for the certification. And in turn, the professional development organizations are forced to respond to that, because that's what I'm asking for as competencies. So there is a market cycle through which several changes, I think, that all of us are working on can get driven. And personally, I would say, while Yes, there are certain policy changes we might be, constantly in the middle of. We are very much looking for the market to respond. And interestingly, what we are finding is that this market is not just the private market. Several state governments actively encourage their teachers to go through this certification or some part of it, because they actually find that this kind of a voluntary certification is actually something that their teachers also respond to better compared to a top-down assessment, against which a union might protest, etc. And the state government says instead, okay, let me set up a reward for you, and there are teachers who are voluntarily going through it. So there are at least 11 or 12 state governments which actively encourage their teachers to do it. So is this, it's not policy, but it's the government also behaving as part of that broader market. So while, yes, I agree with you that there are some policy changes needed, I think constantly we need to understand the rational economic decision makers in each part of this value chain and what can drive each of their decisions.
I'm going to just push it back a little bit there on the rational decision makers. I think in education, one of the things that we run up against is we were all educated in a certain way for a certain world. That's what we know. That is what is comfortable. And now we know that the world is changing and what children need to know and be able to do and the ways they are in the world is changing. But we, the adults, the parents, are afraid. If we do it differently, then what? How is that going to impact my child? So we revert to what we know and we say that's what's the best thing that we can do for children. So as long as that fear is in the rational, in parents' minds, I think it really makes it difficult for some of the changes in teacher education, the change that teachers may even know they need to make because they have the pushback from their stakeholders.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. But it's a very interesting point that you make, and I just want to use an analogy with the healthcare sector. A lot has changed in medicine. What I got as a child is very different from what doctors advise for my daughter. But I go with the doctor's best advice because I think that he or she is a professional who knows better than me. Why do I not go with the teacher's best advice? And we are fundamentally, as parents, not seeing the teachers of our children as professionals. And the more we can make the teacher as much a professional who is updated on what needs to be taught, on the cutting edge stuff out there, then as parents, I would want us to defer to that. To defer to the professional who knows what needs to be taught to my child, just like I defer to the professional who's giving medicine to my child. So, I mean, that's the direction in which I would like this to eventually go.
Thanks.
Yeah, if I could just add to it, I think making quality visible, and I'm really talking about the mainstream system here, and I think this is one of our goals. We are municipal schools that we set up, and at times, when our students are successful in many, many ways, not just academics, we're very happy when the government, the municipality says, they're our schools, we're proud of them. Making quality visible to the government officials, to the policy makers, this is what quality can be. I mean, we've had Secretary of Education, Delhi. What he writes in our book is, it's such a happy school. Congratulations. And I think it takes time, changes in mindset. It won't happen overnight. You can't force policy changes. But making that quality visible is crucial. What is quality?
Thank you. Yes.
I'm not a teacher, but I am passionate about education, 2 children, 2 grandchildren, etc. And I'm one of the founders of one of the local schools, the Bombay International School. And I have a lot of friends who are teachers. And yesterday, just yesterday, I heard something that absolutely horrified me, that certain good organizations have approached the government with permission to set up teacher training centers, and we're told, not necessary, we have enough. I hope it's not true.
I think the consensus up here is that is true. I'm not sure who said before the program that there is a sense that there are enough teacher education centers. It goes back to, but what is the quality of what is being taught, and who are the folks doing it, and are they able to bring teachers to the knowledge and skills and belief in self and professionalism that we need.
And to give credit, the government is aware of this and they're trying to upgrade teacher education. I think we've got to give all credit to the government. It is a megalithic system. They've inherited a lot of problems. It's not going to be easy. But Maharashtra has a surplus of teacher education colleges. But the demand is for English medium teachers, and they don't have enough. Something political there.
Absolutely. I think we have time for 0 more questions, but we're going to take one more anyway.
Hi, thank you once again for a really excellent discussion. We were just curious about what you see as the role of the arts within the context of this. So again, biased because me and my colleague here are both drama teachers, and there's a lot of conversation right now, for example, in the UK about how our funding cuts are affecting arts education. And in India, where we've not had that TIE movement, but there's an entirely different relationship with the arts. So I was just curious about what your opinion and your experience is from that context.
I'm just going to say thank you, first of all, for being in the arts, and then I'm going to pass it over to our colleagues, and if there's time, I'll come back to it.
So frankly, we are just starting to touch arts education, so don't know too much about that space. And all I can say is that in India, at least, a lot of the demand for teachers in the arts, which is whether it's visual arts, dance, music, whatever, is also driven by the supplemental space. So it's not just driven by in school. In fact, in school it's actually relatively smaller because there's a small number of schools which give a lot of weightage to it. But for majority of the schools, it's a side activity. Whereas it's driven a lot more by the supplemental space. And in fact, it's an even more unorganized space where parents struggle even more to know who are the best teachers out there. And it's further complicated in terms of competencies because we've started sort of thinking about this, but it's further complicated in terms of competencies because there's this whole thing about are you a good practitioner versus are you a good teacher, which particularly comes up in domains like music, dance, etc. And what is more important? Is it more important that you're able to sing really well or teach singing well? And where? So don't have a clear view because we are just starting work on that. But all I can say is that it's a very, very important space. And I do hope a lot more work happens in that space as well.
Fiona, could I come in on this?
Oh, go ahead, please.
So again, I'd like to just take us back to a little bit of history on this. A lot of the curriculum that exists in the middle and upper grades in India was created in the post-independence. And if you see the dialogues of the curriculum committees, they were trying to do two main things. One is bring in rationality. And that's why the sciences, because the country at that point was largely illiterate and needed sciences to bring in rationality. The second big thing was national integration. We needed to create the concept of India from 560 individual princely states. So therefore, the history, the civics, the geography was to bring all that together. the discussion on the arts is so little. But now, even in 2005, the national curriculum framework that came out, the sports and the art sections, in my view, are so poorly written. But in the post-AI world, you know, when children are going to pass out in 12, 15 years from now, when a lot of the logical reasoning type stuff is going to be done by computers, and creativity, empathy, expression is going to be so key. If I had a magic wand, honestly, I would make 75% of the curriculum arts and sport and 25 elsewhere. Because I think in the past we were fighting to try and make that happen, but now there's an extremely logical reason for that. A child who's joining grade 1 today, when she comes out of grade 12, knowing just the sciences is not going to give her either a great citizen or a great private life in terms of economic empowerment. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the three domains of development that everyone's talking about: cognitive, affective, social-emotional, and physical. But I think there's a fourth one. It's aesthetics. And it is. We stress it. But let's look at the actual situation in the mainstream system. Morning shift, 7:30 to 12:30. 5 hours only. Half an hour goes in the lunch break. 4.5 hours instructional time. And an extremely heavy syllabus. I mean, the government keeps telling you to add this, add that, but where is the time? I think somebody's got to look at these aspects of it also. When you've got shift systems, and in another country I used to visit regularly, I won't mention the name, but they even have 3 shifts. Can you imagine what's happening? And it's going to hit India with urban development. So there are practical issues in this. It needs to be dealt with. And a lot more investment in education to overcome this. And I think the economy is developing. We've got to spend much more of the GDP on education.
Thank you. I'm looking to our hosts here. I know we're over time.
Can I ask one question?
All right, you get to ask the last question.
I guess I want to, the conversation has been very positive and constructive, and but I want to go back to where you started, that we have 4 school systems in the region that are doing amazing work. So what are we learning from them? What can we do to encourage greater connection with these school systems so that we can, learn from, how effective they are? And what is going on in this sphere? Are we doing a lot of work with these 4 countries that are excelling in education?
Go ahead, Ramya.
Okay. At the level, so if you take countries like South Korea, Singapore, Finland, etc., at the level of individual organizations in India which are working in education, there is a lot of cross-exchange, I would say. There are many entities, I'm sure many of us here, and others who are linked with relevant organizations in these countries and trying to learn from them, etc. Similarly, I would say many governments in India have started actually engaging with some of these governments, and there are, learning exchange programs. There are programs of some government school leaders visiting some of these systems and understanding more about them. There are people from some of these places like NIE, Singapore, etc., who are coming to MHRD, doing stuff. So some of that is happening. So I think some of that is happening. I think the broader point I would want to make is, I think each of us working in the space based on whatever we are working on needs to be very sharp about what is it that we want to pick from each of these systems and what is it that doesn't work in our context. So when we take the space of teachers, for example, and the competencies for teachers, professional development for teachers, what we found very relevant is that a system like Singapore or Finland has spent a lot of time thinking about what are some of the qualities that teachers need to have. And yes, we are learning from that to some extent. At the same time, what Singapore or Finland, the way it is very different from us, is that, it's an extremely small country. So Singapore is like, whatever, South Bombay or something like that. I don't know if it even comes up to Worli or it's before that. But yeah, so it's extremely small. So it's tight, and in terms of at least the number of people, and it's tightly governed. So which means that, if I pass an order from the top, it gets obeyed. And if I say that, to go back to Aditya's words, if I say that I want to inspect, then I can actually inspect, and I can actually make a set of things happen through that. Whereas with the complexity that we operate in, whether in the private space or in the government, some of that is just impractical. And that's why I go back to, from a governance standpoint, what is it that we may just need to do differently? And that has played out sector by sector in India. It is not unique to education. Sector by sector are solutions, whether you take telecom, whether you take, whatever. Sector by sector, our solutions have been governance-wise fundamentally different, even if technically they may be very similar. And in teaching and education, again, I think the technical part of the solution will be very similar to these countries potentially, or at least there'll be a lot to learn. We can customize it. But the governance part of the solution and the socio-political part of the solution, I think will be very different. And which is where, as I said earlier, we are placing a bet on the market, because of where we are in India. And each of us will sort of take the socio-political part of it forward in a different way.
Yeah. If I can build on what Ramya said, I completely agree that I think we have to pick and choose the items which we think are most relevant to us. And I want to give you an example of something that multiple governments are now doing in India. So Singapore, like Ramya said, the strength is in their teacher professional development and their leadership development. So we studied that system along with multiple state governments, presented to the National Center for School Leadership, MHRD and stuff. And now, instead of having some basic thing, like saying instead of having seniority-based promotions, can we look at an assessment of the skill sets and therefore promote? Now, this is such a small thing, but within government, this is extremely difficult to do. But Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Orissa, Jammu and Kashmir have all now shifted to a more skill-based promotion system rather than merely a seniority promotion system. So I think what we can copy from these systems is not just, they also teach arts in this way, their curriculum includes this, but a lot of the systems that they have set up to be able to deliver on education. So Madhya Pradesh, for example, had 15,000 teachers apply for 3,000 select positions of leadership within the state, and then ran a 4-step selection process to make sure that the best people are in those senior positions. And this is something that has not happened in the last 70 years in the country. So I think these are the sort of examples that we are able to borrow from across. And I do believe that they are happening.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, we have a partnership with Singapore. As an example, we've got researchers coming in from Cambridge. There's a lot of international interaction and a lot of interest in what we're doing. I think there's a lot that teaching and learning is a universal phenomenon. And I think a lot of what's happening elsewhere in the world is very relevant. Leadership, yes, but also pedagogy. There's a lot that can be learned. And I got a shock when the Secretary of Education made a statement, and it made me realize, look at Maharashtra. If you went to looked at the population of Maharashtra, it would be the 7th largest country in the world, just our state. We don't realize the size of the problem.
And Maharashtra is actually trying to create an international board, right? Yeah. So that and that is a movement toward changing the education landscape, but also then they're investing in teacher training in order to have that happen.
In fact, we are getting into that, training the teachers.
Fantastic. I want to say a thank you to Ramya, to Elizabeth, and to Aditya for being with us this evening. I know you have more questions. You're going to have to hold them.